So before we start, I'd like to ask you a question by show of hands. How many of you here would describe yourself as shy? Quite a few people. How many of you might describe yourself as too shy to raise your hands? Not that many. So by saying that somebody is shy, it's like implying that someone else isn't. It's as if there are types of people. In fact, there are no such type. We all somewhere on a level of shyness, as we are on many different characteristics. And today I'm going to talk more about those characteristics, what they are, what the latest science and research tell us about it, and how is it relevant to our work as people who design, not for personas, not for people who are made up by stakeholders, but for real people. What makes us unique as a real person? So in fact, in the English language, I found there's almost 30,000 words that describe characteristics of a person. We can describe somebody as being antisocial, or as being a narcissist, if we want to talk about their dark side, or as enthusiastic, or as an empathic, and so on. The list goes on. And that's not new. The ancient Greeks, they told us that the world is based on 4 elements. And these 4 elements of fire and air and water and so on, they together build 4 fluids that define our temperaments. There's the phlegm, there's red blood, black bile, and yellow bile. And in different mixes of those combinations of fluids, we get different personalities or characteristics. The chemistry behind it is completely wrong. But as you'll find in a couple of minutes, they actually were right conceptually. So some of you may have taken tests like Myers-Briggs and so on, where we describe people as a type of person. And as we know, there are not 8 types or 16 types or 64 types. There are millions of different combinations of types because there are no such thing as types of people. Those kind of personality tests are invalid and they're unreliable. And in the last 25 years, over and over, when people do meta-analysis, that's where they take many different personality tests and studies and statistics, and they run a factor analysis. That means that they find as many different correlations as possible, and anything that is correlated with something else is considered as facets of the very same thing. So when you run this kind of studies, what you find is that there are only 5 dimensions of difference. The people who started this in 93 defined those 5, and since then, as you run more and more studies, psychologists are finding that this is a repeatable observation. Sometimes somebody finds a 6th dimension, then in another study it's correlate highly with something else, and they reduce it. So those 5s, we're going to talk about them now in detail. We're going to understand what they are, and then how it's relevant to the way we interact with digital experiences, with brands, with products, and what we can do about it. So the first dimension is called neuroticism. Some of us would score very low, and some would score very high. It's about how prone to worry you are. You can think about it as a smoke detector. If your smoke detector in your house is too sensitive, you'll have too many false alarms. But if it's the opposite, the result might be catastrophic. You might get your house burned down. So it's okay to have some false alarms. It's okay to be worried. Some of you might sometimes wake up in the middle of the night worried, and then you worry about being worried. Well, fortunately, this is why you're here today, because you survived, because one of your ancestors had a very sensitive smoke detector. They were vigilant in their environment. They survived. They made it. Every one of these characteristics, being high or low, is good for you. It's why you're here today, why you're alive. And it's genetically determined. All of those 5 characteristics, they have a biological basis. These genetical and physiological elements, they cannot be changed. But it doesn't determine the whole of the score that you get on that dimension. So when it comes to neuroticism, there are there's one gene, which is called the serotonin transporter gene. It's related to our mood. And we all get two of these genes, one from each of our parents. Now, when they ask people to describe in the last 6 months of their life how many key stress triggering events they've experienced, what we find is that those who have two long ones, only 4 out of 5 events happen, they'll have episodes of depression. Those who have two short ones, it's enough for 2 events and they'll be depressed. 20% of them will be depressed, not everybody. Those who have a short and a long, or a long and a short, they report somewhere in the middle. This research is repeated in various configurations, but the same patterns are found. So you can think about it differently, as if you have walls, and the taller your walls, the less likely your river is to be flooded. But at some point, we can all be flooded. Now, people who are explorers, they score very low on neuroticism. Sometime in the past, they had ancestors that explored other resources, that ran away, that immigrated somewhere better, that survived. And that's what they are here today. We also find that people who join the army, people who join military type organizations, and police officers tend also to score low on neuroticism. So being high on neuroticism is good for you because you're vigilant, but it also makes you anxious and potentially depressed. The next dimension is extraversion. Are we aloof and quiet, or are we enthusiastic? Are we out there, outgoing? It's nothing to do with being able to socialize or network. We can all socialize and network. It's something much more fundamental about where we get our energies. And we all score somewhere on that dimension. So people who score high, they also tend to have more sexual partners. And I'm talking about people who score very high. They tend to have broken families, but they also tend to seek incentives and rewards, which I will describe in a second in more detail. Now, when you take people who score high on extroversion and you show them sad pictures, pictures of cemeteries, and you measure their mood doesn't change. But when you show them happy picture, their mood becomes very positive. Neuroticism, which is a completely different dimension, you can be high on neuroticism and low on extroversion and vice versa. But when you show this kind of picture to people who are high on neuroticism, their mood becomes very low. And that doesn't make that much of a difference to them. When we look at brain activity, what we find is that in the brain there's these 2 areas which are related to being dopamine driven, which is related to seeking incentives and rewards in your environment. And this part of your cortex, which is related, your prefrontal cortex, related to analyzing the environment around you for cues, what we find is that there is a requirement for less activities here for this to start fire and for dopamine to be released and for the person to be happy. In plain English, it means those who are high on extroversion, they get excited from stuff in the outside environment much more easily. So, in their natural habitat many thousands of years ago, those who have that kind of wiring, they were out there seeking incentives, but they also had broken families. The next dimension is agreeableness. It's a bit of a strange word, but it means to what extent are we tend to be hostile and uncooperative, or very cooperative and trusting and empathic. Earlier we had a talk here about empathy. It's related to that. So when we take a person and we run them, we ask them to participate in a lab, psychology experiments that required some game. And I won't go into detail to the kind of experiment, but when we start, we give them some coins, say $10. And a stranger comes to the room to take a part in the game. What we find most people, they give $5 to the other person that they don't know, which is the same reason why Some of you might give instructions to a stranger in the street when they ask for direction, although you'll never see that person again. Why do you care? There's something about us that wants us to be more cooperative, to help other people. If we do the same experiment with chimpanzees, and I say we, I haven't done such a thing, but as scientists, so if we do that kind of thing with chimpanzees, our relatives, well, what we find is that obviously with food, what we find is that they don't share. And when the other monkey is not a stranger, it's somebody from the group, they don't share. And if it's a sibling, they don't share. There's something about us, naturally, we are sharing. And part of scoring high on agreeableness and being cooperative is based on two key elements. One is called mentalizing, to what extent we are good in understanding what someone else is thinking, building a mental model or representation of someone else's thought processes. And the other is empathizing, be able to feel what someone else feels. The level of empathy that you might score, as we had earlier. So that ability to mentalize started 4 years old. Now you can all ask yourself, how does he know that? How do we know? So when you play with a little kid a game, and you say to them, this doll, Sally, has a basket. In the basket, there's a banana. And then you tell the kid that Sally is now going to leave the room, and you take the doll away. And you said, now I'm moving the banana to a box. When Sally comes back to the room, where would she look for her banana? And some kids would say in the basket, and some would say in the box, because some would already develop the ability to think from what someone else is thinking. We are all adults here, and we can do this very well. But we can all mostly we can go down 4 levels of nested mentalization. Not many of us can do that, where we think many, many more levels. People who can do 6 or 7 levels, they tend to score high on agreeableness. They tend to have more friends. They tend to have wider social networks. The second thing is empathy. Some of us are very low and some are very high on empathy, which is another element of agreeableness. We can measure it, as we had before, by there's this professor from Cambridge, Sacha Baron Cohen, and what he said also in his book is there are 3 types of people who don't demonstrate empathy. There's the autistic people, and then there's the psychopath, like in Reservoir Dog, where it freaks us out for how they can do that kind of thing. So when we speak about psychopaths, it's quite interesting because they score very high on mentalizing, which is how they manipulate their victims. This is the only personality dimension that we see different scores between men and women, where 70% of men, they score lower than women on agreeableness. Women score higher on tests related to mentalizing, to understand what someone else is thinking. And if you inject in laboratory conditions testosterone, women show less signs of empathy. So in nature, if you're high, you're harmonious. You're cooperative, but you're sacrificing. In some societies, when everybody has similar DNA and they're very aggressive and hostile, they'll have more resources. But then they'll start to kill each other, and after a couple of generations, there'll be less of them, and they'll move into cooperation. The next dimension is called openness, openness to experience. Are we very practical and conventional, or are we creative and imaginative? So when I say creative, I'm not talking about visual design or pictures or art that is more on what sometimes people mislabel creativity. It can be any form of creativity, whether it's verbal or whatever. So take, for example, these 3 words. If you had to come up with a 4th word that has a relationship to those 3, what would it be? Spider. So some people can do that very quickly, some struggle. There's statistics around it because it's based on an association test. Here's another one. What would be a 4th word?
Nuts.
Maybe. Sorry? Deep. That's right, deep. So this test is a word association test used as part of diagnosing people with schizophrenia. Schizophrenic people are very good at this. But also people who are very creative are good at this. If you take the word shark and you think quickly of the next two words that come to mind. Fin soup. What did you think, Kevin?
Shark teeth.
Shark teeth. So naturally, most people, unlike our audience today, what happens is they have a cognitive network of association that go immediately and activate properties of an object as part of a, if you were a programmer, it's like a class diagram. So the context in which a shark lives and what kind of creature it is. But more creative thinking people, more divergent cognitive style, might come with this kind of words. When lion, for example, is an abstraction. So, in some times in society, in history, somebody who scored high on openness, we can't do the test today, they're dead, but we can through anecdotal evidence analyze what they might be. They didn't have very good life, did they? They were considered odd, they might have been burned down. In other times, they were a poet or a leader or a famous stand-up comedian. They use abstractions and metaphors and semantic manipulations to come up with ideas that change the world. So it can be good, it can be bad. It might make you a leader because you're a creative problem solver, and it might mean you're schizophrenic or odd. So scoring high is a good thing. Scoring low, it's also a good thing because you'll be very practical. The next dimension is conscientiousness. Are you spontaneous and careless, or a very organized and self-directed person? People who score low, they're quite spontaneous and careless. They enjoy gambling as anyone else that does, but they're more likely to be addicted to it. They're not very strong in holding themselves in control. They're more likely to be an alcoholic or become addicted to some types of drugs or any drugs. So ultimately, it's about impulse control. And when you look at the brain, what we find is that this area shows more activity for the least control impulsive people. So there's a relationship between particular areas of the brain that have activities and impulse control. People who are very, very high, extremely high on conscientiousness, they might suffer from a personality disorder. In fact, all of these dimensions, when you score extremely high, you might be mad. So if somebody is the type of person who wake up every morning at 6:13, they then eat 2 boiled eggs with 7 soldiers. And then at 8:20, they're in the office reading the Daily Mail or the Telegraph, whatever newspaper, the same one every day. They do the same routine. They have 15 white starched shirts, no other shirt. They might suffer from obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. This is not OCD. OCD is something completely different. Obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, happens when somebody is very low on conscientiousness and very high on neuroticism. They are very anxious, and they do rituals to help them with their anxiety. People who have obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, they're obsessed with perfection. So we now know there are 5 dimensions that research is repeatedly showing us. About half of it is determined by biology, and the basis of it can make us unique. Just like red, green, and blue can make 16.7 million colors by 256 levels, there are many different levels of those 5 dimensions to create millions of different combinations of people. But does it actually mean anything for us here today as designers? Can we use it for design? Is it relevant? That's what we're going to find out. So who remember those campaigns, those adverts I'm a Mac and I'm a PC. Does anybody who haven't seen it? Because I asked somebody in my office yesterday and he looked and I was mad. And so the question is somebody who has a particular personality is more or less likely to buy a Mac or a PC? So somebody done that study and they asked 108 students who get a Mac or a PC, whatever they want from college as part of the private tuition fees, what is their personality by analyzing using different diagnostic tests, and how they see the characteristics of the computer that they've chosen. And what they found was not very interesting. They found that conscientiousness, which was related to the functional features of your computer, was the only small correlation. There was no other relationship. So actually there's no people who are PCs or a Mac as a person. However, generally speaking, when you look at consumer behavior research and psychology in marketing, we do see relationship between personality traits and brand personality. When we personify a company or a brand or an experience, we tend also as people to buy brands that have a similar personality to what we perceive our own, but not completely. Conscientiousness is considered to be more relevant to the functional aspects of a brand, and that has not got very high correlation, which is in contrast to the Mac PC finding. The other more symbolic dimensions around neuroticism, extroversion, agreeableness, and openness, they have much higher correlations. I want it, and I want it now. Impulsive internet shopping. When researchers have used a temporal discount paradigm, which means in English, you give somebody a discount for a very short period of time and you make them aware of it, and people want to satisfy needs quickly because it's a deal. Well, what we see in research is that the more similar the perception that the person had to the characteristics, the personality of the brand to their own, the more likely they are to buy. Which means it's not about gratification, it's about trying to find something similar, trying to embody yourself as a symbol in something else. Some people speak about satisfiers and maximizers. There are two types of people. Those who shop online, or it can be offline as well, but online. If they were booking a flight, as soon as they see the right price, the right time, the less connection or whatever, they book. Versus the maximizers, who need to exhaust all of the different possibilities and options. It's written by Barry Schwartz in the book Paradox of Choice. I'm sure most of you heard about it. There's a good TED talk about it. Is it actually really just a correlate to something to do with our personality? And what they found, it's not correlated to conscientiousness, as somebody who's a maximizer doesn't actually do it because they have this organized nature. It's highly correlated to neuroticism. People who are high maximizers, they also tend to be more unhappy, more worried. They could have done better, they could have searched more, and overall they're not very happy when they shop. Passive resistance to innovation. There is a model that I can't describe in detail, it's quite complicated. There's many aspects of it, where various types of clusters of personalities are related to predicting the likelihood that somebody will adopt a new product. Most people don't want new innovative products, although we want as design to get the most innovative things. But one strong correlation is with neuroticism. If you design something highly innovative and new, and you target it in the market, those who are highly neurotic, they are less likely to be interested. For them, you need to emphasize the more functional and reliability aspect of the product. For those who are high on openness, you might want to make sure that they understand it's very innovative. Business systems. Some of us need to use at work a computer system that is forced on us. We have to adapt it. The question is to what extent we make it part of our work. So in one study, a guy called Chen in 2011, he looked at pharmaceutical sales reps and to what extent they were using automation within their sales systems. And he was able to predict from their personality how much of the system they'll use. There are other similar studies in different domains. We can actually use this kind of information, these models, these frameworks that are published to predict how likely somebody will adopt the solution and to what level. Problematic internet use. Some people feel lonely or depressed, and it has some impact in how they use the internet. Some studies look at the cognitive mechanisms that are correlated with those kind of behaviors and to their personality. And when statistically you clean out the time online, what you find is that you can predict from personality traits problematic internet use, including impulsive and compulsive use. Compulsive means that I keep thinking about shopping online or doing something online even when I'm not doing it, and I have to do it, as opposed to something unhealthy that I do when I am online. And there's another element which I find very interesting around political consumer behavior. That's where somebody going online and they are more likely to shop for things where they perceive the brand to be associated with something good for the environment, sustainable, boycotting child labor type of companies, and so on. So those who are high on openness and high on agreeableness are more likely to become political consumer buyers or behavior in a political way online. However, those who are high on extroversion, you see some negative statistical impact. So there was this study that Cambridge University did when they asked more than 86,000 people to complete personality tests online. In return, they'll get for free a psychological profiling from Cambridge University psychologist. But they had to give access to the Cambridge University algorithm. It's called My Personality, to go and look at their Facebook. And then they run many different combinations of correlations between what people like and their personality. For example, people who said, I like Salvador Dali, also score very high on openness. That means that when you design an experience, if you knew what someone's personality is, not because they've told you, because it's not going to be realistic to ask them to complete a test, but by capturing what they're doing online, you might be able to target the different messaging, different experiences, different journeys. Here's some of their findings. For example, people who are calm and relaxed, meaning they score low on neuroticism, they're more likely to like kayaking and a Ferrari. People who said they like Minecraft and Wikipedia, they're more likely to be scoring low on extroversion. There was a Mail Online article about it when there was very interesting comments. Some people find it a little bit creepy that computer system can now do that kind of stuff. They claim it to be bad, that your phone will know you better than your family. But I have a client who is a serial entrepreneur, and he has a small insurance company. And he has this kind of data where he can target in Facebook different adverts that emphasize different features of a product and take to a different landing page and then a different experience to increase the likelihood that they'll buy online in insurance. And they have software that can create various types of insurance propositions to test different things in a multivariate way, much more than just the A/Bs of versions, to be very, very concise. Has anybody heard of this? Crystal Knows. You have. Have you used it?
My friend has, I haven't.
So Crystal Knows, you register. I did yesterday. And then you point it at someone's LinkedIn, and it works out their footprint on the internet, and then what is their personality. And it then tells you how to talk to them, how to work with them, what they might be good and bad at, how to write them an email, and so on. For example, this person that is me, it says specific stuff you have to do when you sell to me. Like you need to get your homework done and you'll be asked tough questions. My colleague Jason, it says that you need to use big words like this is the best in the world, and then you'll get excited and he'll buy from you. However, I ran it the second time because the first time my friend has showed it to me and populated my profile, and I got slightly different personality. Plus, it says that it's based on 64 types of personalities, and there are no 64 types. And it reads a little bit like a horoscope. So in psychology, we have this thing called the Barnum effect. That the Barnum effect is that if you write somebody a personality description, they are likely to say that it's an exact description of themselves. And this is what might be the danger here. Because if I say to you, you sometimes like to be in the company of others, but the moment that you prefer to be on your own, you'll all agree that it's a description of yourself. So those kind of things are meaningless. So can we use this kind of information about what makes us unique and what it might mean in terms of how we interact with technologies to design different experiences? Say there was an insurance company that wanted to do for the health insurance part of their business an app that helps people to stop smoke because it will reduce the claims that will be related to smoking-related health issues. And you were designing that app for this insurance company. And there were two people, Dan and Ruth. They both work in the same company. They have their employer's health cover. They both have the same kind of income, and so on and so forth. Lots of the demographics of a made-up persona, they have the same. And when you do contextual research, they do similar activities at work, and you have empathy, and you immerse yourself in their life. But Dan is prone to worry, and Ruth is emotionally stable. Ruth is very enthusiastic. The other person is quiet. Ruth is careless. Dan is very organized. Would that make a difference to the likelihood that they will adopt a piece of software? And after adoption, that they'll actually use it. Almost 90% of apps are only used once after they're downloaded. What would you do for somebody who is careless to make them use it and engage with it and keep going? And would that actually work or put off Dan? So in other words, if you have a product and there's a person and there's some experience, the dialogue or interaction between the two, and the person has some characteristics, and so does the product, and both have a personality, can that drive some of your approach to how to make something relevant? And as we know, there's many different combinations of what people can become or be. So I was told if I want to do a good presentation, I need to have some pictures of brains, a picture of a cat, which I failed on, and a bell curve. So here's my bell curve. So just like, nobody said that to me. So just like empathy that we saw earlier, and height, and many other things, but not everything about people, it's our scores, they distribute normally. And most people, for example, if you take neuroticism, they will be between here and there. So if you're very high on neuroticism, you're there. On the extremes, that's where we have problems. The dark side suddenly pop. Madness, that's what we would see. I'll give you an example before we start to talk more about design. So if somebody is very high on extroversion, they get very excited. They're all over the place. And they're also very neurotic. And they don't understand people or care much. They're quite hostile. What kind of person would that be? It's a narcissist. I'm sure you all have one in your company if you have more than 20, 30 employees. And if they are the same as I described, but they do understand and care about people, they're still likely to have a personality disorder because these are extreme levels. They might have histrionic disorder, which means that they are a drama queen. They understand people really well, which is how they know how to play with them and dramatize. And these people, under stress conditions, they'll behave differently. For example, that person would love stress because at the time of crisis, they can self-nominate and be the best and most visible in the company. They love it. They have a stage. So in that world of difference, there's so many unique attributes that create so many different colorful combinations. And if we want to design for people, we know there's not 3 personas. There are many zillions of personalities But what we can do is think of the normal distribution. Although it's good for designers to create to design for extremes, like somebody told me, I don't know if it's true, that Apple tested iPads on toddlers as a group to see if they can use it. It sounds to me they may have not done it, but let's say it's true. So we can design for extremes. So ignoring the crazy extremes, we can start to populate different scenarios of use. So take, for example, Woody, this guy here that you've seen, if you notice, in different pictures. He's my colleague. He agreed for me to take his photos. Woody is very unique. There's no other Woody in the world. There'll never be another Woody. His ancestors share some of his DNA. They also may have come from Yorkshire like him. But he's in his 20s. He's a digital native. He lives in London. And by the way, people who move to London, they score higher on extroversion than most people in England who stayed, in his example, in Yorkshire. If you Google BBC and Big Five personality, you'll see that there's a data visualization of the UK and how our personality changed in different parts of the UK. So Woody is very unique. And what's making him unique is not just his personality, not just what I said today. Clearly there's more to it. His autobiographical stories, what make him himself, his motivations, which are in the context of his life, make him different to people who might have the same personality. We all have different life events, traumas, all kind of things, happy moments. But underneath all that, there are 5 biologically based things that change the way and impact the way that we think, that we react, how we might feel, that are constant. He might move to Yorkshire, and I don't know him that well. Let's say he was an extrovert, and it could be that 100 years ago his great-grandfather did some expedition to find wheat in the other village. Who knows? But if you thought that there are 10 levels on each of these dimensions, let's say there were only 10 that you can actually measure, and you had 10 in the power of 5 to give you 100,000 combinations. Clearly, in the UK, for instance, there's 62 million people that won't cover it. Maybe my scale is wrong. So that doesn't define everything that makes us unique, but it's an underlying and important element. So I'm sure you would all agree these are a very, very exciting time for us in design, because we're moving away from 2005 when we type era when we had to prove we have a place on the table, when we spoke just about usability, and we move away from making things that are useful or indispensable or loved, and we're now moving into creating very unique, very personalized experiences. And we need to move away from personalizing to sell more adverts into personalizing in context and to the personality of a person, experiences that really, really transform and change people's lives. So in these times, in addition to the contextual research that not only allow us to acquire insights, but it also changes us as people, because we understand someone else very, very deeply. But there's so much data out there, there's so much research that we can't ignore. So one way we can use this kind of information is to generate different usage scenarios and experience maps and prototype concepts of ideas that are based on what really makes us different to one another. Not what your client's MD made up, or somebody who invented psychology again because they did use their research and they interviewed 10 people. There's a lot of data out there. So go out and use it. So, any questions? Yes?
Very interesting, but you're kind of crossing the boundary between psychology and sociology, because yes, with big data you can actually get this information, but how do you design a system that will actually accommodate every single personality? Messaging might be different. Even the way that the data that you show can be different. But when it comes to design, how do you change the design to accommodate, like, as you said, billions of possible different people?
Okay, good question. So I'm not sure I'm confusing in some level sociology and psychology, because the questions the psychologists ask are about people as individuals, and sociology look at patterns and trends in larger groups. But I understand that in society there are many different types of individuals. So if we look into this representation, what I recommended to do is to pick a few examples of people who are fairly extreme. For example, that person who is very organized, and maybe that kind of person who is extremely not. And if we had picked, say, between 3 and 10 distinctively different types of personality clusters, of course we don't know that all of this is covered, but we know that we've addressed some extremes. So somebody who is careless might need a lot of push and some gamification in the example of an insurance and smoking, and some other type of experiment to get them interested and to organize things for them. But somebody who might describe themselves as the data dude, who want to be organized and download and play and share and be obsessed with it, that might not work for them. It might annoy them, and they want to deal with some complexity. So those kind of questions you can ask yourself so that you can start to generate different ideas in the early stages of design. When it comes to messaging, then you're right. Then it's very clear that it's much easier because you can use data to crunch it and be very, very specific. So I think I did on time exactly, and Julian is going to throw me away.
Exactly, keeping you out. Thank you very much, that was great.
Thank you.